The assignment no one wanted Kane sat at the corner table of the dusty frontier outpost, nursing the last of his lukewarm coffee. He wasn't here for pleasure. This was where jobs came to people who didn't ask too many questions. The war had ended years ago, but soldiers like him didn't fit well in peaceful places. Out here, in the edge worlds between human and alien space, work was always dangerous. But it paid. The barkeep slid an old datapad across the table. "Got something for you?" he said. "Simple job. Guard duty." Kane raised an eyebrow. "If it's so simple, why is it coming to me?" The barkeep smirked, because everyone else said no. That was never a good sign. Still, Kane tapped the datapad. A short message appeared. "Guard the package until the buyer arrives. 24 hours, full pay on delivery." Below the words was a picture. Not a crate. Not a piece of equipment. A woman. Her features were alien soft, delicate face framed by long black hair. Skin pale, but glowing faintly with moving blue patterns, like rivers of light beneath the surface. Her eyes were a deep silver, and though she was sitting still, there was something regal in the way she held herself. The file labeled her as Allura, Geisha. Kane frowned. "She's the package." The barkeep lowered his voice. "Word is she's some kind of high-class companion. Bought for someone important. You just keep her safe until the buyer shows up tomorrow. Easy credits." Kane didn't like escorting people, especially ones who looked like they'd never been in a fight. But money was money. He shrugged. "Fine. Where is she?" The barkeep nodded toward the back room. Kane stood, pushed the door open, and there she was, Laura sitting quietly on a low seat, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't look up when he entered. "I'm Kane," he said. "Guess I'm your guard for the night." Her eyes lifted to meet his, calm but unreadable. "Guard or jailer?" she asked softly. The question caught him off guard. "Just here to make sure you're alive when the buyer comes." She gave a small nod and looked away, as if the conversation was over. Kane wasn't used to being dismissed so easily. He stepped closer. "Look, I don't care what you did or why you're here. Just don't cause trouble, and we'll get through this." That night, Kane sat in a chair near the door, rifle resting across his knees. The trading post was quiet, except for the low hum of machines and the wind scraping against the metal walls. Allura sat on the floor by the small heater, her eyes half closed. Hours passed. Kane started to think maybe the job really was going to be as boring as it sounded. Then, just past midnight, he heard a faint crunch outside. Like boots on frozen gravel, he was on his feet in an instant, moving to the slit window. A shadow shifted in the darkness just beyond the light. Then another. Kane turned his head toward Allura. "We expecting company?" She didn't answer at first. Then she rose slowly to her feet, her glowing patterns pulsing faster. "They are not here to buy me," she said quietly. "They are here to kill me." The words chilled him more than the night air. "Kill you? Why?" Her eyes locked with his. "Because if I live, their war fails." Before he could question her further, glass shattered. The door slammed open and 3 figures in dark cloaks rushed in, weapons drawn. Kane moved without thinking, firing 2 quick shots that dropped the first attacker instantly. The second lunged at him with a blade, but Kane sidestepped, smashing the butt of his rifle into the figure's jaw. The third attacker went for Allura, but she moved with surprising speed, twisting away just as Kane fired again. The cloaked body dropped to the floor. The room was suddenly silent, except for Kane's heavy breathing. He looked down at one of the fallen attackers and saw a strange insignia on the arm a-swirling. Pattern of gold and red. Allura's face went pale at the sight of it. Kane saw her take a step back, almost trembling. "That's your people's mark, isn't it?" Kane asked. She didn't deny it. Yes, she whispered. And if they have found me here? Then tomorrow will be too late. Kane's grip tightened on his rifle. This was no longer just an easy payday. Something about this job had just changed. Kane wasn't sure if he could walk away from it now. The first attack, Kane didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The bodies of the attackers lay sprawled just outside the trading post door, the cold air creeping in through the cracks. He had dragged them outside after making sure they were dead, their weapons stacked in. A corner Allura sat by the heater, her knees drawn close to her chest. She hadn't spoken since the fight. Her glowing skin patterns had dimmed, as if her body was conserving its strength. At dawn, Kane checked the locks and scanned the horizon through the post's battered scope. No movement. The sky was a pale gray, the kind that made the whole world look dead. He turned to her. You said they were here to kill you. Why would your own people send killers after you? Allura's eyes were fixed on the floor. Because I am not what they told you I am. Clearly, Kane muttered. You're not just a geisha. She looked up at him then, and there was a sharpness in her gaze he hadn't seen before. I am the last witness to a crime that could destroy a powerful house. My buyer is the one who ordered it. If I reach him, I die. If I run, they hunt me. There is no safe place. Kane leaned against the wall, arms folded. So this guard job is really just delivering you to your execution. Yes, she said simply. He cursed under his breath. And when were you planning to tell me? That. I told you last night, she said quietly. But you did not want to believe. Before Kane could answer, the motion sensor near the window clicked twice. Someone or something was moving outside. He grabbed his rifle and motioned for Allura to stay low. Through the slit in the wall, he saw shadows approaching 5, maybe 6 figures. They weren't rushing in this time. They were moving in a wide arc, trying to surround the post. Kane's gut told him this wasn't just another small hit squad. These were professionals. The first shot came from the left, shattering the glass near his head. Kane ducked and fired. Back his round sparking against the distant wall of a storage building. He heard boots pounding outside. They're coming from all sides, Kane growled. Allura stood and moved toward the back door. We must leave now. Leave. They've got us surrounded, her silver eyes locked with his. Then we break the circle. She grabbed a small pouch from her bag, pulled out a thin metallic disc and pressed it into his palm. It was warm, too warm for something that had just been in her bag. What is this? Kane asked. Throw it when I tell you. He didn't have time to argue. The front door rattled as someone tried to force it. Kane fired through the wood, then swung his rifle toward the back, where another figure was climbing in through the window. The disc in his hand pulsed faster, almost as if it was alive. Now Allura shouted. Kane hurled the disc toward the window. It hit the ground and burst into a blinding sphere of light. The intruder screamed, clutching his helmet as the light spread in thin tendrils like spiderwebs, wrapping around the other attackers outside. They can't see or hear us for a few moments, Allura said. Move. Kane grabbed his pack, slung the rifle, and followed her out the back. They ran across the frozen ground, the wind cutting at their faces. He glanced back once the attackers were still stumbling in the strange light, like insects. Caught in a web, they reached the edge of the settlement, where a half-buried cargo hauler sat abandoned. Kane yanked the hatch open, shoving her inside before climbing in after her. He hot-wired the ignition, the engine groaning to life. As the hauler rumbled onto the open road, Allura spoke again, her voice low but steady. You should leave me. Here, take the vehicle and go. If you stay, they will kill you too. Kane kept his eyes on the road ahead. Not a chance. I don't walk away from someone I'm supposed to protect. Besides, they already tried to kill me once. That makes it personal. For the first time since they met, Ilura gave him a faint smile, brief, almost sad. You are a strange human, Cain. They drove 4 hours through the barren wasteland. The snow grew heavier, coating the windshield until Cain could barely see the road. He kept the speed low, scanning for any sign of pursuit. By late afternoon, they stopped near a narrow canyon to rest. Cain checked the hauler's power levels, while Ilura gathered a small pile of dry shrubs and lit a tiny fire. You fought well back there, Cain said. But I have the feeling you're holding back something big. Ilura stared into the flames. There are things you cannot unlearn, Cain. Powers that draw enemies the way blood draws predators. If I use them, the hunters will multiply. Cain sat beside her, the firelight flickering across his scarred face. Then I guess we better make sure they can't find us before you have to. But even as he said it, both of them knew the truth: this fight was only going to get worse. And somewhere out there, the buyer was still waiting. Secrets in the candlelight. The canyon was quiet, except for the faint crackle of the small fire Ilura had built. The wind outside whistled softly, carrying with it the distant howl of night creatures. Cain sat with his back against the cargo hauler's cold metal, rifle across his lap, eyes sweeping the shadows beyond the flickering light. They had been on the move since before dawn, but now the night pressed in thick and heavy. The hauler was hidden deep within the narrow canyon, its engine covered with tarp and stone to muffle any heat signature. If they were lucky, Ilura sat across from him, her hands held close to the fire. The glow from the flames danced across her skin, making the strange shifting patterns under her flesh ripple like slow-moving rivers. Cain caught himself staring, not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because the patterns seemed alive, almost thinking. Those markings, he said finally. They mean something, don't they? She looked up, silver eyes reflecting the firelight. You see more than most. Been trained to notice details, Cain said, his voice even. And I've noticed they move differently when you're scared or lying. Her lips curved into a faint smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. They are not markings. They are my lineage, my people's living record. Every child of my house carries their history under their skin, passed from mother to daughter. The patterns tell the story of our bloodline, our allies, our sworn enemies. Cain frowned. And that's why they want you dead. She hesitated, staring into the fire as if deciding how much to tell him. There was a meeting, a forbidden council between 3 great houses. They planned a war to break the human expansion into our border worlds. I was not meant to be there, but I heard everything. The next day, my house was destroyed. My mother and sisters, all gone. I survived because they believed I had been sold far away as a Geisha. Cain tightened his grip on the rifle. Oh, so this buyer, he's one of the ones who wants the war. Yes, she said quietly. He wants me delivered so I can disappear before I speak. My death will erase the last living record of what was said. Cain let out a slow breath. And if you stay alive, then I can call upon the old debts, she said, her voice gaining a dangerous edge. There are worlds, hidden worlds still. Loyal to my blood, they would rise against him. But he knows this. That is why he hunts me. The fire popped loudly, sending a small spray of embers into the cold night air. Cain leaned back, processing her words. You could have told me all this before. She looked at him sharply. Would you have believed me? Cain didn't answer. Maybe he wouldn't have. But after the last 2 attacks, he had no doubt her story was real. Hours passed. They spoke little, each listening for signs of pursuit. The canyon walls groaned now and then under the shifting wind, and far off, a rock tumbled down into the darkness. Cain's instincts prickled. Something was out there. He stood, moving quietly to the canyon mouth, peering into the black. At first, he saw nothing. Then, faintly, a glimmer like moonlight catching on metal. He dropped low. "We've got company," he murmured. Alora's skin patterns brightened instantly. The flowing lines moving faster, her breathing quickening. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small vial of shimmering dust. "What's that?" Kane asked. "A memory snare," she replied. "If they see us, they will forget where we went." "That's useful," Kane muttered. "Why didn't you use it before?" She met his gaze. "Because it only works once, and the price is high." Before he could ask, she scattered the dust into the wind. The grains seemed to vanish, but a strange heaviness settled over the canyon, like the air had thickened. Alora sagged forward slightly, as if the act had drained her. Kane caught her before she fell. "Easy. What's the price?" she whispered. "It takes a piece of my life each time." He swore under his breath, steadying her against the haulers. Hull, out in the dark, faint voices rose, confused and arguing. Footsteps faded. The danger passed. When she was stable again, Kane sat her down by the fire and handed her a canteen. She drank slowly, then looked at him. "You could leave now. They have lost my trail for the moment. Take the hauler and go back to your world." Kane shook his head. "I don't quit halfway." Her gaze softened, the faintest trace of relief passing over her features. "Then we move at first light. There is someone I must reach before the buyer finds me." Kane leaned closer. "Someone who can help. Someone who owes me their life," she said simply. "And in our culture, a life debt can topple empires." The fire burned lower, casting long shadows against the canyon walls. Kane stayed awake long after Alora slept, his thoughts churning. The job he had taken for quick credits had turned into something far more dangerous. And for the first time in years, he realized he wasn't just fighting to survive, he was fighting for someone else's future. Somewhere in the dark, a hunter's howl echoed through the night, reminding him that dawn might bring more than just light. The road to nowhere, the first light of dawn crept into the canyon. Pale and cold, spilling over jagged rock walls like liquid frost. Kane stamped out the last embers of their fire, brushing snow from his shoulders. The air was sharp enough to sting the lungs, and their breaths rose in thin white clouds. Alora was already awake, her silver eyes scanning the horizon above the canyon rim. The shifting patterns beneath her skin pulsed in a steady rhythm, dimmer now, like a heartbeat slowed to conserve strength. She carried herself with quiet grace, but Kane could see the weight in her shoulders every step she took. Was under the shadow of someone who wanted her dead. "Which way?" Kane asked, slinging his rifle over his back. She pointed to the east, toward a long frozen expanse of pale tundra that stretched until it met the horizon. "We must cross the white flats before nightfall. Once we pass them, the buyer's trackers, we'll lose our trail for a time." Kane glanced at the endless snow and ice, shaking his head. "Looks like an easy place to die of exposure." Her lips curved faintly. "It is. That's why few follow." They left the canyon and began their march. The hauler wouldn't survive the terrain ahead, so Kane had hidden it under rock and ice, leaving it behind. The wind whipped at their faces, carrying flecks of ice that stung like needles. Their boots crunched against the brittle surface, each step echoing in the vast emptiness. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the howl of the wind. Kane's soldier instincts kept him alert for movement on the horizon, scanning for the dark shapes of pursuit. But the only thing he saw was an endless, blinding field of white. Alora moved quickly despite the cold, her long robes swirling with the wind. "You walk like a soldier," she said after a long while. "I was," Kane replied. "A long time ago." "Which war?" Too many, he said, ending the topic. He didn't need to relive it, and she seemed to understand, falling quiet. Again, by midday, a black shape emerged on the horizon, a cluster of weathered stone towers jutting from the ice. As they drew closer, Kane saw that they were ruins, half buried under drifts. The walls were carved with strange, looping symbols that seemed to twist when he looked at them too long. "This place isn't on any map," he said, running his gloved hand over the carvings. "It is older than your maps," Allura answered softly. "Older than my people." They sheltered inside one of the half-collapsed halls to escape the wind. Kane took the chance to check their supplies. Half a canteen of water each, 3 ration bars, and 2 extra ammo clips. It wasn't enough for a long journey. And he knew it. Allura crouched by a broken altar at the center of the hall, brushing snow from its surface. The patterns under her skin brightened faintly as she touched the stone. "You've been here before," Kane guessed. "In dreams," she murmured. "My mother told me of these places, sanctuaries built by those who walked the stars before either of our races were born." Kane gave her a long look. "If this is a sanctuary, why don't we stay?" She shook her head. "Because they will search here first. The buyer knows I would come to places tied to my bloodline. We must keep moving." They left the ruins and pressed on. The sun slid lower, casting long shadows across the ice. Kane noticed something ahead. Jagged ridge that split the flats in two. As they drew near, he realized it was a frozen river, its surface cracked and glittering like shattered glass. It was then he saw movement, 3 dark shapes cresting a rise behind them. "Company," he muttered. Allura didn't look back. How far? Far enough to run, close enough to shoot. The hunters were faster on the open ice. Kane and Allura darted toward the frozen river, the wind tearing at their faces. The sound of pursuit grew sharper, boots crunching on snow. The distant hum of alien rifles charging. They reached the river's edge. The ice groaned under their weight. Kane swore under his breath. "This thing isn't going to hold." "It doesn't need to," Allura said, pulling a thin crystal rod from her robe. She struck it against the ice, and a faint blue light spread outward in ripples. The ice beneath them thickened instantly, turning dark and solid. Kane stared for a split second, then heard a shot sizzle past his head. No time for questions. He returned fire, his rounds sparking against a rock as the hunters took cover. Allura grabbed his arm. "Do not kill them if you can help it." "Why?" Kane growled, ducking another shot. "Because their deaths will call more. Their laws demand blood vengeance." Kane gritted his teeth, but switched to suppressive fire, forcing the hunters to keep their heads down. Together, he and Allura crossed the frozen river and slipped into a narrow pass between 2 ridges by the time they stopped to catch their breath. Night was closing in fast. Kane looked back and saw no movement, but he knew it was only a matter of time before the hunters picked up their trail again. "Where to now?" he asked. Allura pointed to the shadow of distant mountains. "Beyond those peaks is someone who owes me everything. If we reach them, the buyer will think twice before striking." Kane stared at the dark silhouette of the mountains. It was still days away through dangerous terrain. "And if we don't?" She met his gaze steadily. "Then we die." The wind howled around them, carrying that truth into the night. The ambush on the bridge by the second day in the mountains. The cold was no longer just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. The thin air burned in Kane's lungs, and the rocky paths were slick with ice. Each step could be a fall into the endless drop below. The mountains rose like jagged knives on both sides, swallowing the sun early and leaving them in long, frigid shadows. Allura moved quietly ahead of him, her dark robe fluttering in the wind. The shifting patterns beneath her skin faint in the dim light. She hadn't spoken much since they left the flats, and Cain could tell her energy was fading. They had eaten their last ration bar that morning, and the water was nearly gone by late afternoon. They came to a site that made Cain slow to a stop. A bridge had stretched across a canyon so deep the bottom was lost in shadow. The bridge was old, built from metal beams that had rusted in the thin air. Sections of it were warped or missing, and the wind made it sway slightly, groaning like a wounded animal. "This is the only way," Allura said, her voice steady. Cain eyed the structure warily. "Looks like it's held together with hope and bad welds." "It was built by my people centuries ago," she said. "It will hold." Cain didn't argue, but his gut told him something else. This was the perfect place for an ambush. Narrow, exposed, no cover. If the buyer's hunters had been tracking them, this would be where they struck. Still, there was no other route. He adjusted his rifle and stepped onto the bridge first, testing each plank with his weight. Allura followed, close behind. The wind whipped at them, carrying the sound of the creaking metal into the vast emptiness below. They were halfway across when Cain's instincts screamed, "Down!" He barked, pushing Allura flat. A shot cracked through the air, sparking against the metal where her head had been a second earlier. Cain swung his rifle toward the far end of the bridge. 3 figures were stepping out from the shadows. Weapons raised. At the same moment, 2 more appeared behind them. Cutting off their retreat, pinned the lead hunter at the far end, called out in a deep, guttural voice, "Hand over the woman. Human. You will be allowed to live." Cain's laugh was humorless. "That's funny. You tried to kill me twice already. I'm not falling for it." The hunter's tone sharpened. "You will die here then, alone." Cain opened fire first, forcing them to dive for cover behind the twisted metal. The hunters at the rear returned fire, shots sizzling past Cain's head. Sparks danced off the bridge as rounds hit, and the metal groaned under the impacts. Allura crouched low, her hands pressed together as she whispered something in her own language. Cain didn't have time to look. He was too busy moving from one thin beam to another, using the smallest pieces of cover he could find. One of the hunters tried to rush him. Cain met him halfway, slamming the rifle butt into the alien's jaw, then shoving the body over the side. It fell silently into the endless darkness below. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a sound that made Cain's skin prickle along. Low hum. He risked a glance back at Allura. Her patterns were glowing brighter now, pulsing in time with the hum. "What are you doing?" Cain shouted over the noise. "Ending this," she replied, her voice strange, almost resonant. The hum grew into a sharp, vibrating note that seemed to pierce the air. The hunters froze mid-step, their hands clutching their heads. One dropped his weapon entirely, screaming. Another staggered back, eyes wide with panic. Cain had never seen anything like it. The note wasn't just sound, it was pressure, pushing at his skull, forcing him to grit his teeth against it. And yet, it didn't seem to be meant for him. Allura's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding in her language. The hunters broke, scrambling away from the bridge as if chased by unseen predators. Within seconds, they were gone into the mountain shadows. The hum faded. Allura swayed on her feet, her glow dimming rapidly. Cain caught her before she could fall. "You could have done that before?" he asked, half in disbelief. She shook her head weakly. "It is dangerous. Calls others. Now they will know exactly where we are." Cain's stomach sank. "Then we'd better move before their friends show up." They crossed the rest of the bridge quickly, the metal groaning under each step. Once they reached solid ground, Cain glanced back. The bridge swayed gently in the wind, empty now, but he knew it wouldn't be for long. Allura leaned against him as they walked, her breathing uneven. "We will not have much time before the buyer learns of this." The song carries far. Cain tightened his grip on his rifle. Then let's make sure we're somewhere they can't reach before nightfall. The mountains loomed ahead, sharp and dark against the dying light. Somewhere beyond them was the person who owed Ilora a life debt, someone who might be there. Only chance. Cain didn't know what waited for them there. But after the bridge, one thing was certain. This was no longer about just surviving the job. Now it was about finishing it, no matter the cost. The final confrontation, the mountain path ended in a narrow plateau overlooking a frozen valley. A cluster of ancient relay towers stood there, their thin spires reaching toward the darkening. Sky-like skeletal fingers. The metal was corroded, panels missing, but Cain could still hear the faint hum of power deep within their frames. "This is it?" Cain asked, scanning the towers. Ilora nodded. "This station can send a signal across the border worlds. If I reach my allies, they will come. The buyer will not dare move against me with them here." Cain swept the area with his rifle scope. No movement. Too quiet. That quiet didn't comfort him. It was the kind that came before trouble. They moved into the shadow of the tallest tower, their boots crunching over ice and brittle rock. Inside, the station was dim, lit only by the weak blue glow of ancient consoles. The air smelled faintly metallic, like dust and cold machinery. Ilora approached the control panel, running her fingers across its surface. The glowing patterns beneath her skin pulsed brighter, as if the station itself was recognizing her. "It still listens to my bloodline," she murmured. "I can call them." Cain stayed near the doorway, scanning the horizon. The sun was sinking. Fast, painting the sky in streaks of orange and red. Shadows stretched long across the valley. Then he saw it movement. A shuttle was descending from the north, its hull black and angular, moving with a predator's grace. Cain didn't need to see the insignia to know who it belonged to. "We've got company," he said. Ilora froze. "How many?" Big shuttle could hold 20, maybe more. She stepped back from the console, her expression tightening. "It is him." The shuttle landed hard on the ice below, kicking up a cloud of frost. From its ramp, a line of soldiers emerged in perfect formation, tall, armored, and armed with long rifles. At their head walked a man, or something close to one. His features were sharp and flawless, his black robes edged with gold. A long ceremonial blade hung at his hip, and the crest of a great house gleamed on his chest. Even from this distance, Cain could feel the authority radiating off him. The buyer. The soldiers fanned out, surrounding the base of the tower. Cain raised his rifle, but knew the odds 2 against 20 wasn't a fight they could win by brute force. A voice boomed from below, carried by a translator drone. "Ilora of House Vieira, you will come down and surrender yourself. The human will be spared if he stands aside." Cain glanced at her. She didn't move. Her eyes met his, calm but resolute. "Their word means nothing. If you leave, they will kill you anyway." "Wasn't planning on leaving," Cain said. Ilora stepped to the edge of the platform, calling down in her own language. Her tone was sharp, almost mocking. The buyer responded in kind, his voice low and venomous. Cain couldn't understand the words, but he understood the challenge in them. Finally, Ilora turned to Cain. "He has invoked the right of blades," meaning, Cain asked. "A duel. I name a champion. That champion fights in my place. If he wins, I live. If he loses, I die." Cain smirked without humor. "Let me guess, you're naming me?" Her silver eyes held his. "You are the only one I trust." The soldiers parted as Cain descended to the valley floor. The buyer stepped forward, drawing his blade. It was long and curved, shimmering with a strange energy. "You are not of our kind," the buyer said in accented human speech. "You will die quickly. Kane tightened his grip on his combat knife. I've heard that before. The duel began without ceremony. The buyer struck first, a blur of speed, his blade slicing the air where Kane's head had been a moment earlier. Kane rolled aside, slashing at the buyer's side. But the alien twisted away with unnatural grace. Steel rang against steel as they traded blows, each strike sending shivers up Kane's arm. The buyer was faster than any human Kane had fought, but Kane had grit, and he had nothing to lose. The soldiers formed a silent ring around them, their faces unreadable behind their visors. Allura stood at the edge, watching with an intensity that burned through the cold. The buyer's blade grazed Kane's shoulder, drawing blood. Pain flared, but Kane used it, driving forward in a brutal series of strikes that forced the buyer back a step, then another. The alien snarled, swinging in a wide arc meant to take Kane's head. Kane ducked low, stepping inside the strike, and slammed his knife into the buyer's side. Not deep enough to kill, but enough to make him stumble. Kane pressed the advantage, knocking the blade from the buyer's hand with a vicious twist. The alien fell to one knee, breathing hard. Kane raised his knife for the finishing blow and stopped. The soldiers tensed. Allura's eyes widened. Kane stepped back, lowering the blade. I'm not killing you. You lose, but you live. The buyer stared at him, disbelief etched into his face. Slowly, he rose. You show mercy, he said, as if tasting the word. Call it what you want. Kane replied. The buyer looked toward Allura, then to his soldiers. Finally, he gave a sharp nod. By the law of the duel, I am bound. You live, and no blade of my house will touch you again. The soldiers lowered their weapons. The duel was over, but the war between houses was only beginning. The choice that changed everything. Snow fell in slow, lazy spirals settling over the valley as if the duel had never happened. The soldiers of the buyer's house stood silent, their formation no longer a wall of death, but a shield of honor. The man Kane had spared, once cold, calculating, certain of his victory, now kept his eyes on the ground, the tip of his ceremonial blade resting in the snow. Kane was breathing hard, his shoulder bleeding from the duel, the cold biting through his worn jacket. He didn't take his eyes off the buyer, not until Allura moved to stand beside him in the silence that followed. She spoke not to Kane, not to the buyer, but to the soldiers. Her voice was calm, but it carried like the wind across the valley. You have seen the duel. You have seen the mercy shown. The law binds you. My life is no longer forfeit. The soldiers shifted uneasily. Kane could feel the weight of their stares. Up. The law of the duel was absolute in their culture. The one who was spared owed their life and loyalty to the victor or the victor's chosen. And the chosen, in this case, was Allura. The buyer's voice was low but firm. The human has defeated me. I am bound to his honor. His gaze lifted to Kane. Your choice was unexpected. You could have taken my life and my command. I don't want your command, Kane said evenly, and I'm not interested in spilling blood just to prove I can. A faint, humorless smile touched the buyer's lips. Then you are more dangerous than I thought. Allura stepped forward, her silver eyes locked on the buyer. You will escort us to the border, and you will not hinder my call to my allies. The buyer hesitated, then bowed his head in acknowledgement. The soldiers fell into step behind them as they walked back toward the relay station. The air was still tense. But Kane noticed something. Some of the soldiers glanced at him with the faintest trace of respect. Inside the station, Allura returned to the console. Her glowing skin patterns flowed faster, spreading intricate shapes. Across her arms and neck, she touched the controls, and a deep, resonant tone filled the room. The ancient machinery stirred, sending a signal far into the void. Cain leaned against the wall, watching her work. So, what now? She didn't answer immediately. Her hands moved with purpose over the console, and the hum of the signal grew. Now, she said finally, the balance shifts. My allies will hear my call. The buyer's rivals will see that he was beaten and spared by a human. It will force them to act. That going to start a war? Cain asked. Perhaps, she admitted. But it will be a war they will not win easily. Not with you and my side. Cain shook his head. With a faint smirk, make it sound like I signed up for all this. You did, she said simply, the moment you refused to step aside. The buyer approached, his shadow stretching long across the cold metal floor. Your message is sent. Yes, Allura replied without looking at him. Then my duty. Now is to see you delivered safely, he said. He turned to Cain. And yours is to decide what you are in all this. Guardian. Mercenary. Or something greater. Cain met his gaze. I'll figure it out when I get there. The journey to the border was unlike anything Cain expected. The buyer soldiers no longer treated him as an enemy. They kept their distance, but they walked with the disciplined silence of those escorting an honored guest. Allura stayed close to Cain, her steps steady despite the long trek through the snow-choked valleys. On the second night, they camped beneath a jagged cliff that sheltered them from the wind. The buyer kept to himself, sharpening his blade by the fire. Cain sat across from Allura, the flames casting gold and orange over her features. You changed the course of this, she said quietly. If you had killed him, his family would have come for me without pause. But now, by sparing him, you've bound him to protect me, even if he hates it. Cain poked at the fire. Didn't do it for politics? Then why? She asked. Cain thought for a moment. Because killing someone who's beaten isn't victory, it's just execution. I've seen enough of that in my life. She studied him for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she placed her hand over his. Whatever your reasons, I am in your debt. In my people's law, that is a bond stronger than blood. By the time they reached the border, Allura's allies had arrived, a fleet of sleek silver ships hanging in the cold sky like watchful predators. The buyer kept his word, handing her over without resistance. But before he boarded his shuttle, he turned to Cain. You have my respect, he said. And my warning mercy can make you friends, but it will make you enemies too. Choose your battles carefully, human. Cain simply nodded as the buyer's shuttle lifted away. Allura stepped closer to Cain. Your place is not here, she said softly. But I would have you beside me when the time comes to set my house free. You are my guardian now, ally, my bondmate. The word hung in the cold air between them, carrying a weight Cain didn't fully understand, but he could feel it. He looked out at the fleet waiting beyond the mountains, then back at her. Guess the road ahead's not getting any easier. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. No, but you will not walk it alone. And with that, Cain realized the simple job he had taken in a dusty frontier outpost had become something else entirely, a turning point, not just for him, but for entire worlds.